I was telling you as we closed yesterday that we've now covered the what and why of who God has called us to be, our life call and life core. And today we're starting in the when, as in, when am I successful? And the unique language for the top of the vision frame here is called life score. So the icon is a target because this is what we're shooting for, okay? And so really what we're saying is, okay, I now know who I'm called to be and what I'm called to do. How do I know when I'm being faithful to that? How do I know when I've succeeded at accomplishing what God has given me to do? And so what we do in life scores, we start to try to name that. We try to give a name to how we can know when we're accomplishing what God has given us to do. And so we do that. We're gonna explore that with 3 tools this morning. So one is the creation of storylines for our life, naming the storylines of our life. So that's storyline creation. The second one is through talking about thriving, surviving, and reviving, which are kind of the 3 phases we could be in at any moment, like any kind of state of being. And we're going to look at the Psalms and like a map of the Psalms to understand that. And then we're going to talk about a bucket list. And a bucket list really is like a lifelong scorecard, okay? So whereas these 2 you'll use in an ongoing way, the bucket list today, we'll just kind of introduce the idea and do a little brainstorming, but it's something you want to be adding to as you go about life, because really that's a lifelong scorecard. These 2 pieces we'll use consistently and ongoing. Cool? Cool. So that's just kind of introducing life score. So we're going to begin first in storyline creation. So we're going to talk about storylines here. So come with me to page 16 and 17. So as we talked about at the front end of this at the front end of Journey 1, the idea of life design or life planning, that sort of thing, is sort of trendy right now. And there are lots of people who've talked about it for years. So if you look at page 16, you can see 4 different ways that some life design people, including the gospel writer Luke, talk about areas of life. And most of the time, when somebody's talking about areas of life, they talk about them as domains. So there are domains of life. So for example, you see there Tom Patterson, who's like a strategic planning, one of the fathers of strategic planning. He says there's 5 domains of life: personal, family, faith, vocational, and community, right? Tony Robbins, who's like a big motivational speaker, he's like, there's like a Netflix special where he's doing this a lot, like clapping to pump people up, right? He has like 7 domains: health and wellness, mind and meaning, love and relationships, productivity and performance, career and business, wealth and lifestyle, leadership and impact. Those are the 7 domains of life in Tony Robbins' system. Burnett and Evans wrote this book called Designing Your Life. They teach a class at Stanford, which apparently is like the most popular class at Stanford. It's really hard to get in, about life design that you take as a senior survey, apparently. And they wrote a book, and they talk about 4 domains of life: health, work, love, and play. Okay? Health, work, love, and play. 4 domains of life. And even as Luke writes about the life of Jesus, in Luke's gospel narrative, between the birth of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus, he says, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and favor with men." So those are like 4 areas of Jesus' life that Paul records that he grew in. He grew in these 4 areas, right? Wisdom, stature, favor with God, favor with men. Those are 4 domains. And so typically, like if you're thinking about a domain of life, what does the word domain mean to you? Like what does it elicit? What is a domain?
Like a kingdom or something?
Okay, a kingdom or something you're responsible for. Okay, what else? Huh? A website. Okay, yeah, like a domain name. Yeah. What else? An area of control. Okay, yeah. So what often, like, in what we're talking about here, the way, if we talk about life design and designing our lives in terms of domains, often what we end up talking about is like places that I occupy. So it's like I go into workspace and out of workspace. I go into family space and out of family space. And it's like I'm either in a domain or out of it, right? So what we find is like when we're talking about how to be faithful to God, rarely is it on or off. Like some things might be at the forefront and some in the background, but really like we have ways to honor God across all areas of our life all the time. So what we do in Unique is we instead of talking about domains, we talk about storylines, okay? And our life can have multiple storylines. So who's familiar with the television sitcom Friends? Okay, great. I think of who is completely unfamiliar. Okay, great. So there are 6 characters in Friends, 3 men and 3 women, Ross, Chandler, and Joey, and Phoebe, Monica, and Rachel, right? And they're roommates, some of them, and stuff. And throughout the 7, 8 years, however long that show ran, 10 years, 10 seasons, okay? At any given time, there were particular storylines within the show that were more or less prominent. So like Ross and Rachel's love story, right? Sometimes was the very subject of the show, but sometimes it was just in the background and it was backstory, right? Rachel's failed betrothal, right? She was at the beginning, she was supposed to get married and that fell apart. And her whole thing of like growing up a rich girl and having to work for herself, that's a storyline that sometimes is at the front of the show and sometimes in the background. And so what you end up with is for one whole story, there's multiple storylines that weave together, come forward and back, right? And that kind of thing. So the question is, what are the storylines of our life? Okay, and why would we use storylines, not domains? That's what we're going to talk about on page 17. Page 17. Number 1, storylines are not limited by physical time and space categories. Time and space. So again, if we think of life in domains, then I'm either in or out. From 9 to 5, when I'm in this building, I'm at work, right? I am a worker from 9 to 5 in that building. It's limited by time and space. But if there's a storyline of how I make an impact in the world, I can move into and out of it freely. Number 2, storylines elevate the power of identity, which is more fundamental than activity. So when I start to talk about the storylines of my life, I can elevate who I am, not just what I do. I can be a human being, not just a human doing. Right? So when it's domains, it's about functionality and place. It's more about my activity than my identity. But in storylines, I can make it more about who I am than what I do. Okay? Number 3, storylines highlight God's authorship and sovereign goodness in my life. So when we can think of our life as a set of storylines that are woven together, it's easier to think of God as the author. If I'm thinking about life in domains, I'm more the subject, the actor. But if I'm thinking of my life as a story that's being written, I can think of God as the author. Okay? Number 4, storylines are more personal, and therefore they become more practical and powerful. So you'll have an opportunity to name your storylines, and that will give them kind of like character and meaning for you personally. And so it's not just, this isn't something everybody does. The storyline is not something, it's not the same storyline in everybody's life. Whereas like if I use Tony Robbins' Wheel of Life, everybody has all of those things in his system. In this system, we're saying there are storylines that God is partnering with you to name and to create, right? That's the personal piece. Number 5, go ahead.
So the concept of that is like all these life coach people say to segment your life, but we are not supposed to segment our life. We're supposed to basically segment our callings.
Yeah, and it's like
it's weird because yesterday we literally spent probably
using that system. Yeah, and so the reason that's helpful is because life can be overwhelming. But we're saying, and like when I first talk to you, you can probably think in categories easiest, right? And so, and a little bit of it is like still categorical, but we want to shift our kind of philosophy of what those categories are from being domains to being storylines. So lastly, number 5, storylines become the basis of gospel-centered life assessment tool. So when I can begin to think about how am I living in a particular area, it can allow me to track on am I walking out my life call most faithfully. Cool? So again, domains are discrete and storylines are fluid and evolving. So that's what I mean by like, they might still be a little bit categorical, to Corey's point, but they can enlarge and contract. One thing can be more prominent than another for a given season. And so when we talk about storylines instead of domains, they're not as fixed. And that's what we're shooting for here, is giving space for God to write our story and have us flex with him. Any other thoughts there, or something you like, or a question you have?
Can they conflict? Like, can you have in your own life 2 storylines that sort of rub up against each other, chafe each other, or?
I think probably we could find like, oh man, I feel as though there's a conflict between being faithful in this area and being faithful in this area, right?
I'm thinking about it in terms of sometimes wanting to be a member of the team,
Yeah.
and sometimes feeling compelled to lead. And
Uh-huh.
those 2 things sometimes conflict.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
those both storylines?
I would say like you're probably talking about something we'll talk about later, which kind of falls down here, which is specific roles I fill. And what role should I take to be faithful in that area? And so that's a part of what we'll end up talking about is which role do I need to step into to faithfully live into this storyline? And that's right. Knowing when to lead and when to follow is one of those things. Absolutely. Yeah. So certainly there's tension. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? Things you like, things you don't like. Perfect. So let's make it more, let's get down to it, okay? So what we do here is we're gonna be on page 18. And as a starting point, we go ahead and work with Burnett and Evans, health, love, work, and play, in that order, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. So when this was first presented to me, it was presented as relationship with God, relationship with others, relationship with work, and relationship with play. Okay? What I have found is that to think about God only in one storyline is not helpful. Okay? And so I tend to now think of this more as like stewardship, relationships, impact, and play or hobbies. Okay? So these boxes are open for you to, like, as I'm explaining this to you, for you to drop some things in here that are kind of like general categories for these 4 storylines. Okay? These boxes, like where in my workbook, I have those first things I told you how it was first presented to me. Relationship with God, relationship with family and friends, relationship with work, relationship with play. That's how I first conceived of it. And what I'm telling you is, don't put God in only one storyline. Understand that God is in all areas of your life. And so it's not that storyline 1 is the God storyline. It's more like, so there's an example in the book that Will gives of a guy who broke out family and friends and then just made sure God was evident in all 4. So he didn't have one that was just health. So he had friend health, family health, work health, play health, right? But, so you can do it any way you want. What's recommended is start with this framework, because then we won't like get too far lost, okay? So let me just kind of unpack these 4 categories for a moment. So what happens is, like, often society tells us to focus here, right? Like, it's about your relationships and your work. Like, make a lot of money, have a good family. That's the key, right? Sometimes to the detriment of developing a healthy play life, having good hobbies, things you're interested in, and to the detriment of your own health, right? Work so hard that you have a heart attack, right? Prioritize your kids and don't do anything for yourself, right? That's kind of the cultural narrative. But what we find is that these two things right here are actually the fuel for doing this stuff well. If I'm healthy and engaged, I will bring my best self to my relationships and my work, right? So maintaining health and a good sense of play are the things that can fuel my relationships and my work the most, okay? The other thing that we hear sometimes is like, okay, in your 20s, focus on health and love, right? Like, stay active, stay physically active, build a family in your 20s. In your 30s, 40s, and 50s, just push on work. Now you've got a family, that's set, so you can kind of leave them behind while you focus on work for 3 decades. And then once you're retired, you can worry about play, right? And so when we do that, like the stories, I think most of us have heard stories about the people who worked, and then had a heart attack at 55 and never actually got to play, right? Or they worked so hard that their family felt neglected and they get to retirement and now they have no relationship with their kids, right? So when we focus on any one of these to the detriment of the others, it can bring our life out of balance and things get broken. And so the key is to be able to track how God is calling me to be faithful in all areas at the same time, okay? So that's what we're talking about, storylines. Any other thoughts or questions so far? Yeah, like recently when I realized that I just straight up enjoy learning things. It is fun for me to, again, the story I've been telling lately is a 300-page book about how to brew coffee. Like, and I just enjoy learning that. And when I can actually free myself up to be okay with that, then it allows me to do some of these other things better. And I can realize that when I read a good book about marriage, it doesn't mean my wife has to read it because she doesn't like deep learning as much as I do, right? To where like the other day I was telling her about an interesting book I heard about and she's like, that sounds really interesting. Can you read that for us? Right? So like, I'm the learner, right? And that's okay. I don't have to get her to be like me now that I understand myself better through play. Yeah, absolutely. Because learning is play, just so you're following me there, right? So, yeah. What else? Anything else? So here's how they become storylines and not just categories, is when we name them. And this is an opportunity for creativity, not a mandate of creativity, okay? So that means like if you move forward and you're still just calling these 4 storylines, health, love, work, and play, that still works, okay? But here are some things like for Aaron, these 4 things are rooted, connected, extending, exploring. Okay. For me, they are reflect the Father, extend the home, multiply the inheritance, and receive the blessing. There was a girl in a recent accelerator I was in when I was tuning up to be able to teach this, and I don't remember all 4 of hers. I wish I did. I almost emailed her coach to ask. Here she had kale smoothie, and here was bear hug, right? So like, and she was like, I just feel better when I start the day with a kale smoothie. So health to me is like kale smoothie. That's my health storyline, right? And like bear hug, when I see somebody, I just gotta give them a big bear hug. So like, that's my love storyline is bear hug, right? Katie Howout just sent me hers. I asked for them this morning. She said hers are chosen daughter, purposeful presence, encouraging supporter, joyful adventure. Right? Those are her 4 storylines. And like, and what we mean by storyline here is like, so weekly, we'll talk about later, weekly I pause and I go, how am I doing in each of these 4 areas? How are things going? And so again, as I think about whether I'm connecting with people, it's about extending the home, taking what God has done in our family and letting it spread through relationship. Like that's extend the home, right? It's about like, did I position myself health-wise to be a reflection of the grace of God? Did I reflect the Father? That's the story of my health, is that I'm reflecting the Father, right? For Aaron, it's like, was I rooted this week? Am I rooted? How well was I rooted this week? That's helping you track your faithfulness to your call. So you can see there's...
Like emotional health and physical.
Yeah, so for me, actually, it's emotional, physical, financial, and spiritual. That's how I started with like, because it was presented to me as relationship with God, it was like learner, teacher, like all these things related to the Bible and prayer and stuff like that. And so after a year of like going like, I gotta pray more to be thriving here, I finally realized like, oh no, like if I wake up and spend 30 minutes breathing and doing yoga, that helps me feel more connected to God. And so I'm better at reflecting the Father when I do that. And it's when I'm more flexible and less tight. So yeah, physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, for me, are the kind of health we're talking about here. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? So there's 2 more pages of examples there. If you have a question about one of those, like on the top of page 20, David L., that's David Lovelace, his storyline 2 is engaging Hufagad because he's a husband, father, and granddad. So he made up Hufagad as husband, father, granddad because he's just trying to capture all of those in one, right? He thinks it's really cool. I think it's silly. Okay, but yeah. So there's different things there. So the boxes on the very bottom, storyline brainstorming, are for you to iterate down. Try a couple sets, okay? Again, the boxes at the top are like if you want to jot a note about what you pulled out of all the things I just said about what these really mean, you can put that there. And then these boxes ultimately are where you would put the names of your storylines, okay? And again, if right now you just have health, love, work, and play, you're good.